50 degrees Celsius, 122 degrees Fahrenheit. It's a number on a screen, a red patch on a weather map. We think of it as discomfort. We think of shade, of water, of air conditioning, as if this is a problem of preference. This is a profound, dangerous illusion. This is not weather. It is a physical assault. At this temperature, the air itself ceases to be a passive medium and becomes an active, aggressive force. Every molecule of nitrogen, of oxygen, is vibrating with a savage, chaotic energy. This energy doesn't ask permission. It transfers on contact into everything it touches. The sand, the rock, and the delicate, water-filled tissues of life. It is a slow-motion fire, and it is not just trying to make you uncomfortable. It is trying to take you apart molecule by molecule. The life that you know, the life that is you, is not a solid, stable thing. It is a frantic, improbable dance of molecules. It is a trillion whispers of chemistry, unfolding in a precise, watery environment, all held together by the most fragile of bonds. Life exists in a thermal safe zone so narrow it is barely a sliver. And 50 degrees is not just outside that zone. It is a declaration of war against it. The first victim, the primary target, is the engine of your existence. Protein. Every single thing your body does, thinking, moving, breathing, healing, sensing, is run by microscopic biological machines called enzymes. These enzymes are proteins, and their power comes from their shape. They are not just blobs of matter. They are intricate, three-dimensional origami, folded into a perfect, specific form. This shape is not held together by powerful, permanent glue. It is held by thousands of weak interactions, delicate hydrogen bonds, the subtle push and pull of hydrophobic, water-fearing, and hydrophilic, water-loving regions. Heat is just vibration. At 50 degrees, the vibration becomes so violent that it physically shakes these delicate bonds apart. The origami unfolds. The protein becomes a useless, unraveled string of amino acids. This is denaturation. It is the same irreversible physics that turns a clear, runny egg white into an opaque solid mass. Think of an enzyme as a specific key, folded perfectly to fit a specific lock. When it fits, a chemical reaction happens. Life happens. But at 50 degrees, that key begins to melt. The heat deforms its teeth, rounds its edges. The key is now useless, cannot open the lock. And this failure is not isolated. It is a cascade. The enzyme that builds your cell's energy molecule, ATP synthase, denatures. The power stations shut down. The protein called hemoglobin, which carries oxygen in your blood, changes shape and can no longer grip the oxygen molecule. You begin to suffocate, even as you breathe. The enzymes that repair your DNA as it's damaged by solar radiation, they fail. Mutations accumulate. It gets worse. These unfolded, sticky proteins don't just stop working. They begin to clump together, forming toxic aggregates, like a traffic jam of broken machinery in the cell's cytoplasm. The entire factory of metabolism doesn't just slow down. It grinds to a halt, choked by its own broken parts. This is heat stroke. It is not exhaustion. It is a catastrophic, cascading, molecular failure. But the assault is a two-pronged attack. The heat doesn't just destroy the workers. It attacks the walls of the factory itself. Every cell in your body is a fortress, a precious bubble of life protected by a barrier called the cell membrane. This membrane is not a rigid wall. It is a fluid, flexible, living barrier made of a double layer of lipids, fats. This lipid bilayer is designed to be pliable, to bend and flex. But heat, as it does to all fats, makes it more fluid. It's the difference between cold butter and melting butter. At 50 degrees, the membrane begins to lose its structural integrity. It becomes leaky. The carefully arranged proteins embedded within it, the gates and pumps, begin to drift out of place. The fortress wall begins to dissolve. Why is this so deadly? Because life is a battery. Your cells spend a huge amount of energy from those now failing ATP enzymes to create a steep chemical gradient. They use a special protein pump to force sodium ions out and potassium ions in. This gradient is the power source for every nerve impulse, every muscle contraction. But the leaky membrane breaks the seal. The ions flood back across, neutralizing the gradient. It is a biological short circuit. The battery goes flat. And the physical assault adds one final, cruel twist. The problem of oxygen. A fundamental law of physics dictates that the hotter a fluid gets, the less dissolved gas it can hold. For a fish in a river that hits 50 degrees, the water becomes a vacuum, stripped of the oxygen it needs to breathe. For an animal on land, the heat and low pressure at altitude mean the air itself is a thinner, less effective fuel. So, this is the fundamental, non-negotiable problem. It is a war on all fronts. The air is trying to cook you. Your own proteins are unraveling and poisoning you. Your cell walls are melting. And the very oxygen you need is vanishing. 50 degrees is not a challenge of comfort. It is a war against the laws of physics and chemistry. How, then, can anything call this inferno home? The cellular machinery is melting. The proteins are unraveling. The fortress walls are failing. In the face of this molecular fire, the body has only one desperate command, an order that overrides all others. Cool down. Do it now or you die. For any mammal, any bird, any warm-blooded, endothermic creature, life is a game of stability. We are built to operate within an astonishingly narrow thermal band, a private internal climate of around 37 degrees Celsius, 98.6 Fahrenheit. This internal furnace, our metabolism, is constantly generating its own heat, just by being alive. In a normal environment, this is fine. We simply radiate that excess heat into the cooler surrounding air. But in a 50-degree world, the laws of thermodynamics become a tyrant. Heat always flows from hot to cold. For the first time, the world outside is hotter than the world inside. The thermal gradient has reversed. This means the environment is no longer a passive sink for our waste heat. It is an active, relentless source, aggressively dumping its lethal thermal energy into our bodies. Our internal furnace is now trapped inside an external forge. We are being cooked from the outside in and the inside out. To survive, we must fight back. We must find a way to shed not only our own metabolic heat, but the invading environmental heat as well. And we have only one truly effective weapon: the miracle of evaporative cooling. This is not a complex biological trick. It is pure, brutal physics. When liquid water transforms into a gas, water vapor, it requires a massive injection of energy. This energy is called the latent heat of vaporization. It is the tax the water molecule must pay to escape its liquid state and fly free. And the heat is that tax. When you sweat or when a dog pants, you are painting your body's surfaces, your skin, your tongue, your lungs, with a layer of liquid. The savage heat of the air, the same heat that is trying to denature your proteins, is hijacked. It is put to work. It spends its energy on a single task: vaporizing that liquid. With every single molecule of water that evaporates, a tiny parcel of deadly heat is stolen from your body and carried away into the air. This is the only way. It is the only mechanism by which an organism can keep its core temperature below the ambient temperature of the air. To facilitate this, the body performs vasodilation. It opens the blood vessels near the skin, flushing your surface with hot blood from your core. Your skin becomes red, hot, and is now the radiator. The sweat then evaporates from this radiator, cooling the blood, which then returns to the core, slightly less deadly. But this weapon, this life-saving miracle, comes with a terrible, terrible price. That price is water. And the 50-degree environment is not just hot, it is dry. The air has an insatiable thirst, a vapor pressure deficit, so extreme it acts like a physical vacuum. This dry, superheated air is a desiccated sponge, and it rips moisture from any available surface. It doesn't just accept your sweat, it steals it. The cooling effect is powerful, but the water cost is catastrophic. A human hiking in this heat can lose over 2 liters of water per hour. For a small desert rodent, this rate of loss is not a temporary inconvenience. It is a death sentence measured in mere minutes. Every breath a panting bird takes, it jettisons its life-sustaining moisture into the void. Every leaf a plant has, opening its tiny pores, stomata, to get $ex to dollar, bleeds its internal reserves dry. This is the central dilemma of life in the heat. It is the core, unsolvable trade-off. To stay cool, you must spend water. But in the very places where it reaches 50 degrees, water is the scarcest, most precious, most non-negotiable resource on the planet. And so, the second crisis begins: dehydration. The body, pouring out its water to fight the heat, enters a new phase of failure. The blood, which is 90% water, begins to thicken. It turns from a fluid river into a sluggish, viscous sludge. The heart strains, beating faster and harder, tachycardia, to push this thick fluid through shrinking blood vessels. The blood pressure drops. The kidneys, sensing the crisis, slam their gates shut. They stop producing urine, desperately trying to reabsorb every last molecule of water. But now, the body's metabolic toxins begin to build up in the sludgy blood. The brain, starved of oxygen and water, begins to malfunction. Confusion sets in. Delirium. The brain itself is physically shrinking, its cells losing water to the desperate body. And here, in this final, terrifying moment, the two enemies meet. The body's survival instinct, sensing the catastrophic water loss, makes a fatal decision. To preserve the last drops of water for the heart and brain, it shuts down the cooling mechanism. It stops sweating. This is the end. The cooling stops, but the heat does not. The thermal assault from the 50-degree air is still raging. With no evaporative cooling to fight it, the core temperature begins to climb, now unchecked. 38 degrees, 39, 40. The proteins from Act 1 begin to denature. The membranes begin to fail. The choice given by the 50-degree world is a cruel one: die of thirst or die of heat. Survive the next 10 minutes by sacrificing the next hour. This is the battle that must be waged, and seemingly cannot be won. So, how does life solve an impossible problem? What do you do when faced with a molecular assassin and a thermodynamic trade-off that guarantees failure? You refuse to fight. The first and by far the most successful strategy for survival in a 50-degree world is astonishingly simple: don't be there. The battle is not won with toughness. It is won with intelligence. It is won with strategy. The 50-degree furnace is a temporary, cyclical tyranny. It is a creature of the sun. When that sun is at its zenith, the desert floor is a lethal, shimmering, alien landscape. It is a world of profound emptiness, a world where the only occupants are those on the absolute brink of death. The air is still. The silence is absolute. This is the day world. But it is not the only world. As the sun touches the horizon, a transformation begins. The ground, which has been soaking up thermal energy all day, now radiates it back into the blackness of space. The temperature plummets, dropping by 20, sometimes 30 degrees Celsius in a matter of hours. The savage, murderous environment vanishes. And in the cool, clear, starlit air, the night world is born. This is the real desert, and it is teeming with life. This is the great behavioral adaptation: nocturnal and crepuscular life. The vast majority of desert animals are masters of avoidance. They are temporal migrants, shifting their entire existence into the cool, safe hours of darkness. The fennec fox, the kangaroo rat, the scorpion, the rattlesnake, they do not endure 50-degree heat. They are asleep, hidden away in a completely different climate. Their secret is the burrow. A burrow is not just a hole in the ground. It is a piece of brilliant passive climate control architecture. The Earth itself has an enormous thermal inertia. It takes a massive amount of energy to change its temperature. While the surface sand can swing 50 degrees or more, just 2 meters down, the temperature barely changes at all. The soil acts as a massive, insulating blanket, averaging out the day's inferno and the night's chill. Inside a deep burrow, the temperature remains stable, often at a comfortable 20 to 25 degrees Celsius, 68 to 77 degrees Fahrenheit. But the architecture is even smarter than that. The kangaroo rat, which may never drink a drop of water in its entire life, adds a final, ingenious touch. Before the sun rises, it plugs the entrance to its burrow with soil. This simple act seals the fortress. Inside, the animal's own breathing slowly releases moisture, trapping this metabolic water in the confined space. The humidity inside the burrow rises, creating a private microclimate. The air in the burrow becomes a humid haven, dramatically reducing the vapor pressure deficit we saw in Act 2. The animal is no longer surrounded by a desiccated sponge. It has created a tiny pocket of air that won't steal its precious water. It never exposes itself to the deadly trade-off. But what if you cannot move? What if you are a plant rooted in the baking soil? What if you are a creature too slow to escape, like a desert snail or a tortoise? Then you must master an even more profound escape. Not an escape in space, but an escape in time. This is estivation. It is the hot weather equivalent of hibernation, but in many ways, it is far more extreme. Estivation is not sleep. It is a pause button on life itself. It is a state of profound metabolic suppression. When the heat becomes unbearable, desert snails retreat into their shells and seal the entrance with a hard, dry barrier of mucus called an epiphragm. They look like dead, white pebbles scattered on the sand. But they are not dead. Inside, life has slowed to a crawl. The heart rate plummets to just a few beats per minute. Oxygen consumption drops by 99%. The animal is burning almost no energy, using almost no water. It is waiting. Desert snails have been recorded staying in this state of suspended animation, not for days or weeks, but for years, waiting for a single rainfall to awaken them. The African lungfish does the same. As its river dries into baked mud, it burrows down and encases itself in a cocoon of its own mucus. Its metabolism drops to a whisper as it breathes air through a tiny tube, waiting months or years for the floods to return. Desert frogs will shed a layer of skin to form a waterproof bag around their entire body, trapping all their moisture, and wait, buried, for the next storm. This is the great secret. The creatures that thrive in the 50-degree world are not the ones who are tough enough to withstand it. They are the ones who are smart enough to avoid it. They are the masters of strategy, the hiders, the waiters. They have recognized that the only way to survive the fire is to simply not be there when it burns. But what about those who are? What about the plant that must be in the sun to live? What about the creature, the lizard or the antelope, caught in the open, with no burrow to hide in? For them, avoidance has failed, and a new, more desperate set of rules must apply. When you cannot run, and you cannot hide, there is only one option left. You must fight. When behavior fails, biology must take over. The body itself must become the fortress. It must be rebuilt, redesigned, and re-engineered from the genes up, with solutions so profound they boggle the mind. This is the story of adaptation of biological armor forged in the 50-degree furnace. This armor is morphological. It is written into the very shape and structure of the organism. Let's look again at the fennec fox. Those enormous, paper-thin ears are not just for listening in the cool of the night. They are a weapon for the day. They are a living, active radiator system. The ears are packed with a dense network of blood vessels, and the fox has conscious control over them. When it is dangerously hot, it triggers vasodilation, flooding those capillaries with hot blood from its core. The massive surface area, relative to its tiny body, allows this heat to efficiently radiate away. When it's cool, it uses vasoconstriction to shut down the flow, conserving its precious body heat. This isn't just a passive feature. It's an active, biological air conditioning unit. This principle of form follows function is everywhere. The Arabian oryx is a brilliant, ghostly white. This coat is not camouflage. It is a mirror. It is a dense fur that reflects a huge percentage of incoming solar radiation before it ever reaches the skin. Desert lizards will literally change their color, turning a dark, heat-absorbing black in the cool morning, and then shifting to a pale, reflective tan to survive the 50-degree afternoon. But for plants, the challenge is different. They cannot flee the sun. So, the cactus evolved a masterpiece of morphological defense. The spines you see are its leaves, modified over millions of years into sharp, woody needles. They have zero surface area for water loss, solving the Act 2 problem, and serve as a physical defense. But they also provide cooling, creating a boundary layer of still air that insulates the plant from hot, dry winds. The plant's skin, its epidermis, is coated in a thick, waxy cuticle that is as waterproof as a plastic bag, sealing its precious water inside. The entire body of the cactus has evolved to be a sphere or a cylinder, the mathematical shapes with the absolute minimum surface area for a given volume. It is a living water barrel, designed to absorb the least possible heat and lose the least possible water. But this external armor is useless if the internal machinery can't take the heat. This is where physiological armor comes in. Look at the camel. The myths are mostly wrong. The hump is not a water tank. It's a pantry of fat. By concentrating its fat in one place, the camel avoids having a layer of insulation all over its body, allowing it to dump heat more easily. The camel's real magic is its blood and its body temperature. First, it is a heterotherm. Instead of burning precious water to stay at a perfect 37 degrees Celsius, the camel allows its entire core temperature to fluctuate. At night, it lets its body cool down to 34 degrees Celsius 93 degrees Fahrenheit. During the day, it slowly absorbs the desert's heat, using its own body as a heat sponge. Its core can rise all the way to 41 degrees Celsius 106 degrees Fahrenheit, a lethal fever for a human. Asterisk before asterisk, it produces a single drop of sweat. Second, its blood is unique. As it dehydrates, a human's blood thickens to sludge. A camel's red blood cells are oval-shaped, not circular. These flexible ovals can still flow smoothly through tiny capillaries even when the blood is thick as syrup, preventing the fatal clots and organ failure of dehydration. It can lose 25% of its body water and keep walking. And what about the kangaroo rat, which never drinks? Its armor is its kidney. It is a biological desalination plant in reverse. Its kidneys are so hyper-efficient they reclaim almost every single molecule of water, producing urine that is a thick crystalline paste. It derives all the water it will ever need from the metabolic water created by breaking down the dry seeds it eats. But perhaps the most brilliant piece of biochemical armor belongs, once again, to the plants. The cactus and the succulent solve the $EXTCO_2 water trade-off with a piece of chemical genius called CM photosynthesis. A normal plant must open its pores, stomata, during the day, needing $EXTCO_2 and sunlight at the same time. As we know, this is a suicidal act of dehydration in a 50-degree world. The CM plant evolved to work a split shift. During the scorching day, its stomata are slammed shut. It is a sealed, armored tank. Then, at night, in the cool, relatively moist air, its entire surface opens. It breathes all night long, taking in massive amounts of $EXTCO_2. But it can't use it, so it stores it. Enzymes convert the gaseous $EXTCO_2 into a solid chemical, malic acid, which is stored in the cell's vacuole. When the sun rises, the furnace returns. The stomata slam shut. And now the real magic begins. Inside the sealed, waterproof plant, the sunlight provides the energy. The plant calmly breaks down the malic acid it stored all night, releasing the $EXTCO_2 internally. It then performs photosynthesis in a closed, private, safe environment. It has separated breathing from eating. This is the level of biological innovation required when physics itself is your enemy. The armor is astounding. The strategies are ingenious. The camel's fluctuating core, the cactus's nightly breath, the fox's radiator ears. But the armor is never perfect. Cannot be. Physics is relentless. The 50-degree heat is a pervasive, ambient energy. It soaks through fur, it penetrates waxy skin, it conducts through the soil. The heat always finds a way in. And deep inside, at the microscopic level, the disaster from Act 1 begins to happen, just more slowly. A vital enzyme, a tiny machine processing sugar, is struck by a violent thermal vibration. It shudders. The delicate hydrogen bonds holding its shape snap. It starts to unravel. It's carefully tucked away. Sticky hydrophobic parts are exposed to the watery environment of the cell. It denatures. This unfolded protein is now useless. But it's worse than that. It's dangerous. Like a rogue piece of machinery, its exposed sticky parts cause it to clump together with other dying proteins. They form toxic aggregates like the plaques seen in Alzheimer's disease. The cell begins to choke on its own broken components. The fortress from Act 4 has been breached from within. This is the moment of truth. This is where the real war is fought and won, not by camouflage or kidneys, but by an invisible, ancient army that exists inside every cell of these adapted creatures. When a cell senses this thermal stress, when it feels its own machinery beginning to fail, it triggers a genetic code red. It activates a special set of emergency genes, and it begins, furiously, to manufacture a class of molecules known as heat shock proteins, or HSPs. These are the cell's emergency medical technicians. They are the triage unit, the repair crew for a world on fire. Their job is to hunt for the damage. The most common of these, known as HSP-70, are the first responders. They patrol the cell, and when they find a protein that has been wounded by the heat, a protein that is starting to unfold, they grab it. They bind to its exposed sticky parts, shielding it from clumping with others. This binding action alone can stabilize the protein, giving it a chance to refold as the cell cools. But if the damage is more severe, the HSP-70 molecule acts as an escort. It transports the damaged protein to a specialized repair bay, another, larger protein complex called HSP-60, or a chaperonin. This complex is a molecular isolation ward. The damaged protein is fed into the HSP-60 chamber, which then seals itself. Inside, safe from the chaotic cellular environment, the protein is given a perfect, isolated space to try and refold. This process is not free. The chamber uses massive amounts of the cell's primary energy currency, ATP, to actively massage the protein, pushing and pulling it, forcing it back into its correct, functional, three-dimensional shape. But what if the protein is damaged beyond repair? What if the key is too melted to be fixed? The cell cannot afford to let this toxic junk accumulate. The HSPs initiate a triage protocol. The protein is tagged with another small molecule called ubiquitin. This ubiquitin tag is a death sentence. It marks the protein for transport to the cell's shredder, a complex called the proteasome. The proteasome unfolds the protein one last time and chops it into tiny, harmless amino acids, recycling the raw materials. This entire process, the genetic alarm, the mass production of HSPs, the active refolding, the tagging, and the shredding, is an active, desperate, and incredibly expensive war. The production of this cellular repair crew and the work they do consumes a monumental amount of energy. Every protein refolded, every toxic clump cleared, burns the cell's precious ATP fuel. And this is the true cost of survival. This is the central, devastating consequence of life at 50 degrees. Energy is the currency of life. It is finite. Every organism has a budget, and a creature living at the edge of its thermal limit must divert a massive portion of its budget, not to living, but to simply not dying. It must pay an enormous metabolic tax just to keep its internal machinery from collapsing. So what is the trade-off? If the energy is going to the HSPs, where is it not going? It's not going to growth. Building new tissue, dividing cells, getting bigger, this is a metabolic luxury. Desert-adapted animals are often small, their growth permanently stunted because all their surplus energy is diverted to the repair crew. They cannot afford to build new parts when they're desperately trying to fix the old ones. It's not going to reproduction. Raising young is the most energy-intensive activity an animal can undertake. The heat shock response is biochemically linked to the stress response, flooding the body with cortisol. This stress hormone actively suppresses the hormones for reproduction. In extreme heat years, mating simply stops. Females cannot afford the energy for gestation. The population stagnates, living on an energetic knife edge. And it's not going to the immune system. A fully functional immune response, hunting pathogens, creating antibodies, is another massive energy drain. The body cannot afford to run two separate, high-alert emergency systems at once. Heat-stressed animals are profoundly more susceptible to disease. Their bodies have made a terrible choice. I will fight the heat today and hope a pathogen doesn't kill me tomorrow. This is the grim reality. Survival is not a victory. It is a desperate, energy-draining stalemate. Life is resilient. It is a master of adaptation. Finds a way. It bends, it shifts, it re-engineers, it endures. It fights on the beaches of physics and in the trenches of chemistry, armed with behavioral strategy, morphological armor, and a microscopic emergency repair crew. We look at this and we see victory. But we are mistaken. We are seeing a stalemate, fought on the razor's edge of an abyss. And here is the most terrifying truth of all. Physics does not negotiate. Chemistry does not compromise. And every single adaptation, no matter how ingenious, has a final, absolute breaking point. For decades, we have studied these creatures as marvels of a stable, if extreme, world. But what happens when that world stops being stable? What happens when a 50 degrees Celsius heatwave becomes a 50 degrees Celsius summer? What happens when the extreme becomes the average? The answer is failure. And it begins with water. Remember the miracle defense from Act 2. Evaporative cooling. Sweating. Panting. This defense has a fatal physical flaw. It only works if the air can absorb the water. If the air itself is humid, that process stops. This brings us to the ultimate non-negotiable limit for all warm-blooded life. It is called the wet bulb temperature. This isn't just a measure of heat. It's a combined measure of heat and humidity. It represents the lowest temperature a surface can reach by evaporation. And the hard, lethal limit for a human being, and for most mammals, is a wet bulb temperature of 35 degrees Celsius 95 degrees Fahrenheit. At that point, the air is so hot and so saturated with moisture that your sweat cannot evaporate. There is simply no room for it in the air. Evaporative cooling, your only defense against ambient heat hotter than your core, shuts down completely. But the 50-degree heat is still pouring in. Your core temperature begins to climb inexorably. 38 degrees Celsius, 39 degrees Celsius, 40 degrees Celsius. Organ failure, brain damage, death. This is not a matter of fitness or water intake or shade. It is a hard limit of physics. It is the point at which the environment becomes literally uninhabitable by complex, warm-blooded life. But before this final, hard limit is ever reached, a more insidious collapse begins. The adaptations we've explored are not designed for a chronic war. They are designed for a crisis. The kangaroo rat's kidney is a miracle, but it requires energy to run its hyperfiltration. The cactus's CAM photosynthesis is genius, but it is slow and it costs energy. The heat shock proteins from Act 5 are lifesavers, but they are unbelievably expensive. When a 50-degree week becomes a 50-degree month, the energy budget doesn't just bend. It breaks. The organism goes into metabolic debt. It is spending more energy on the HSP repair crew and on its physiological armor than it can possibly take in from its food. It runs out of fuel, can no longer pay the repair crew, and the molecular damage from Act 1, which had been held at bay, now wins. The proteins denature, the cells fail, the organism dies, not from a single dramatic moment, but from a slow, accumulating energetic bankruptcy. This is the tipping point, and it doesn't happen to just one animal. It happens to the foundation of the entire system. Look at the plants. Even the brilliant CAM cactus has a breaking point. Its photosynthetic machinery, the delicate protein complex called photosystem II that captures sunlight, is itself vulnerable to heat. At temperatures above 50 degrees Celsius, this machinery is physically damaged faster than it can be repaired. The plant stops making sugar. It starves. So, the plant, the primary producer, the source of all energy, dies. Now, the kangaroo rat, which was perfectly adapted to the heat and drought, starves. Its kidney cannot save it from an empty pantry. The fennec fox, which was perfectly adapted to hunt that rat, now starves. Its radiator ears cannot save it from a lack of prey. The pollinator, which was perfectly adapted to that plant's flowers, vanishes, causing other plant species to fail. The web of life, which we perceived as a collection of tough, independent specialists, reveals itself to be a chain. And the chronic, unrelenting heat has just broken the first link. What follows is not a slow adaptation. It is a rapid, cascading, systemic collapse. The adaptations are all interdependent. They are tuned to an environment that exists, not an environment that is fundamentally changing. And this is the final, sobering lesson. Evolution is slow. It works over thousands of generations, testing and tweaking. But the environmental change we are now seeing is fast. It is happening in decades, not millennia. Life cannot evolve new armor fast enough. The 50-degree average outpaces life's ability to respond, rendering its ancient, brilliant strategies obsolete. The life we see in these environments is not a testament to how easy it is to survive the heat. It is a testament to how hard life has fought, over millions of years, to find ingenious, desperate, and costly ways to just hang on at the very edge of an abyss. We marvel at these adaptations as a spectacle, but they are a warning. They are showing us the absolute, brutal limits of biology. And they are showing us, in terrifying detail, what happens when the relentless, unforgiving laws of physics are pushed too far.